my name is Barbara Allen. I am author of the book Conquering Arthritis, What Doctors Don't Tell You Because They Don't Know. It's been the #1 best-selling arthritis book on Amazon.com for 8 years running. Today I want to talk with you about fermenting ginger. This is ginger root, and I've just chopped up a whole bunch of it. The reason I want to talk to you is twofold. One is if you ferment it, it becomes a very good source of probiotics. And two, many of my clients have sensitivities to various food additives, and sorbate is one of them. And it's very hard to find commercially prepared ginger like sushi ginger or just ginger that you would throw into a stir fry that doesn't have one of these preservatives. So you can totally control the ingredients by starting with the fresh ginger root, and the only other things we'll be adding is water and salt. And because I've made this before and fermented ginger, I've got a little bit of the liquid left over from the last batch of fermented ginger, so I'll be adding that as well. But all that is ginger, salt, water, and the good bacteria that I wild captured from the air. If you don't already have a culture, all you need to do is let this sit out and catch wild bacteria from your own environment. So again, I just started with fresh ginger root. What I did was I peeled it. This one's already mostly peeled, and then just chopped it. So here I have the chopped ginger, just adding it to the jar. And if you've seen any of my other videos on making fermented vegetables, you may remember that for 5 pounds of vegetables, the right amount of salt is about 3 tablespoons of salt. And this is sea salt or kosher salt. It's better not to use table salt because it's half non-salt, it's half dextrose. So to keep everything really pure, it's best to use a pure salt. Himalayan salts or Celtic sea salts would also work, but what you don't want is additives in your salt. Because ginger won't give off nearly as much liquid as something like cucumbers or cabbage, instead of just putting the salt on the ginger and then letting the liquids come out to be the fermentation juice, it's good to actually start with a brine. So if you want to make a brine for fermenting, the recommended amount is 3 tablespoons for 4 cups of water. So since I only have a small amount of ginger, all I need is 1 cup of water. So what I'm going to use is slightly less than 1 tablespoon of salt. I'll just stir that to get the salt into solution. And pour it on my ginger. Add just a little bit of water here to make sure I get all the salt. And then because you don't want there to be a lot of air in the ginger, you want it to ferment all underwater. What I use is I use a large canning jar for the container, and then I use a small canning jar lid to be a press. And then I've got another jar that's small enough to fit in here that I'll fill with water as a weight. And then as the fermentation begins, any bubbles that form from the fermentation process, the weight of that will make them bubble to the top, so your ginger always stays underwater and there are no pockets of air that are there. Because I want this to go a little bit quicker and I don't have to start with wild caught ginger, if I did this, it would probably take about a week for the fermentation to start. by adding a little bit of this liquid and stirring that into the ginger, it'll start fermenting pretty vigorously by the end of today. And here in Phoenix, because the weather is so warm, this fermentation will probably be done in a few days. If you live in a colder climate, it may take a week or two. And the way you know that the fermentation is done is the bubbles stop. And so what I do is I just keep this on my kitchen counter. Once or twice a day when I walk by, I'll press down to see if there are any bubbles that I can have come up. And partly I do that because it's fun, and partly then I know when the fermentation is done. And then I also take a dish towel and I just cover that to keep any dust or any contamination from getting into the culture while it's working. So now we're at day 5 of the fermenting ginger, and it has started working. And so once the culture is started, if you press down, you'll see bubbles come up. That's the gases given off by the fermentation. So as long as when you go by and press on this once a day or so, you're still getting bubbles coming up, the ferment is still working, so it's not done yet. But it's a good idea to press out the bubbles so that everything is touching liquid and not air, and the ferment will happen better and more reliably. And I find this really wonderful. It'll keep for months and months. I think the last batch I did, I had for maybe 6 months, and it's still very good and fresh tasting. And so it's a real convenience not to have to chop ginger every single time I want it. And again, probiotics for anybody with arthritis is a really great idea, because the more you can normalize your gut bacteria by having lots of different healthy bacteria in your gut, the easier it is to overcome that inflammatory condition. The bacteria themselves help downregulate the inappropriate inflammation that's in your body. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I've got many more that I hope you also enjoy.